with DraftKings, you have the opportunity of 5-1 odds on any team with the NBA opening weekend, up to $20 per max bet. In other words, if you bet $20 on a team of your choosing in any matchup, you win $100 if you're correct. Last night, people took 94% of the bets on the Lakers on DraftKings, and DraftKings paid out 5-1 odds. So anyone put down $10 on the Lakers last night, $150. $20, won $100. You can't beat it. And right now, joining us on the World Kind of Hotline, DraftKings NBA analyst Julian Edlow here. Julian, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How about you? I mean, actually, I'm doing great. The NBA is back, so I should correct myself there.
I would say I think we're all doing great now the NBA is back. So, was there something aside from how great that Lakers-Clippers game was in general that stood out to you about the two games last night? Because I think for a lot of us, there were a lot of different things that we observed in those games last night.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting look, an interesting feel, I think, just watching the entire how the league would officially look restarting. We watched a handful of the scrimmages, but it always looks different when it's the real thing. So I don't think I think some takeaways from last night, like the games both got off to rapid starts. Really high first quarter totals, and we just watched this Nets Magic game go for like 70 points in the first quarter. And then teams kind of settled in a little bit, and we saw both unders actually hit after those really fast starts. So I think the pace and like the comfort level of the players is kind of more interesting to see. In terms of the actual gameplay, I guess LeBron looked a little rusty last night. He didn't have his best game from a scoring standpoint, but these guys are going to get comfortable in the bubble. These 8 seeding games, we kind of know who's going to be in the playoffs and who's not. We have, I guess, Portland and Memphis have a huge game to kind of help figure out who gets that 8 seed in the West. But otherwise, these teams are just kind of tuning up for the playoffs. So unless you're really playing for a seed that you feel is important, especially with home court out the window the entire postseason on a neutral floor, there's not that much to play for other than to tune up for these 8 games.
About that Lakers finish there at the end, being from Philadelphia area, of course, and remembering Kawhi Leonard's shot at the end, which I can totally still have nightmares about, it was weird to see Kawhi Leonard so uncomfortable late with LeBron James guarding him.
Yeah, Kawhi we saw a lot of times in the 2019 postseason on his way to that championship with Toronto dominate and not back down, and he clearly did not get to his spot against LeBron on that possession, and was in a really bad spot with whatever it was, like 4 seconds left, and had to defer to Paul George there, which isn't the worst thing in the world. Paul George might have been the better offensive option last night, but just from the Kawhi perspective, yeah, it looks like LeBron it's one play, but LeBron made an impact on him on that play that nobody in the last postseason could make. And conveniently enough, of course, LeBron James was not in the postseason last year for the first time since whatever it was, his second year or so with the Cavs.
Julian, speaking of the game last night, I thought it was interesting also the fact that we saw how important it was for these teams when the supporting cast guys step up. When Kuzma and the other guys stepped up. Alex Caruso had some great plays. Dion Waiters had a couple plays where he was basically just came in, scored out of nowhere. It really seemed to be a huge part of the Lakers, whereas you could tell the Clippers were seriously missing Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell.
Yeah, and they only lost by 2, so kind of an impressive effort from the Clippers, in my opinion. When they get those bench guys back, we weren't really sure what their rotation was going to look like. The Clippers' 6th and 7th man are both, top 2 or 3 candidates for the 6th Man of the Year award. So having those pieces for the Clippers is just as big a piece of their championship hopes as their starters are. Obviously not the players that Leonard and George are, but they need those pieces if they want to contend. So just the fact that they were able to hang with the Lakers last night, it was a terrible start, which has nothing to do with Lou Williams and Harrell coming off the bench. But after that, they kind of found their groove and got up, was it 8 or maybe even double digits in the second half. So it was a very back and forth game. I think we're going to see a lot of back and forth games in the early going because teams are going to just their stride for different 5-6 minute windows and kind of go back and forth. But in terms of the Clippers, I think last night was a positive showing in my mind to be able to hang with the Lakers like that without two key pieces.
Were you surprised that Zion played such limited minutes?
No, I really wanted him to play more, but I can't act like I'm surprised. We remember his debut when he did exactly that until he went off in the fourth quarter and nailed those 4 threes, and we all remember how amazing he played. And then the Pelicans kind of didn't have a choice. They had to keep him out on the floor. I think they played him the first 3 minutes of each quarter and then the first 6 minutes of the fourth, and then there was finally a timeout, and that took the air out of the building. They could take Zion off the floor. Last night that wasn't there, so he could really just play the first few minutes of each quarter, and it didn't last for long. The first time around, Zion was getting real minutes pretty quickly, so hopefully within the Pelicans' next couple of games, we see Zion ramp it up. But the Pelicans are on the outside looking in, so they need to get some contributions from him. If Zion finishes that game, it sure looks like Pelicans win. So if they want to catch this 8 seed, they need to get some contributions from him ASAP.
How strange was it that Zion went out there, had 0 rebounds, and he had 13 points, but he really didn't put a lot into the stat sheet. If you're somebody, for example, who played like a daily lineup, he probably really soured it for you.
Yeah, Zion was pretty expensive on DraftKings last night. I think he was $7,500. Don't quote me on that, but he was up there. And for a guy that winds up, potentially with like a 12-minute restriction, you can't pay that type of money on DraftKings for a guy with just that type of downside due to the minutes. So yeah, Zion right now is just kind of like a wait and see on DraftKings because we need to see him get those minutes until you can pay for him. Unless, of course, the other side of that would be DraftKings adjusts his price and Zion comes back at 4,500 or 5,000. Then we can start to talk about playing him at a cheaper price given his limited minutes.
Speaking of limited minutes, Joel Embiid is going to be getting limited minutes probably throughout this 8-game stretch. We saw him throughout the 3 exhibition games only play about 12 to 13 minutes. So do you think it's concerning that with a new starting rotation, Joel Embiid is already being rested with this calf injury?
To a degree. Embiid's been a guy throughout his career that has been so limited and that Philly's been so cautious with. It would be nice to see him come out with no restrictions, but at the same time, that urgency that the Sixers had coming out of the 6th seed to, get home court in the first round is now kind of gone. I mean, I guess you want to get out of the 6th seed because you don't want to play what's probably Boston, maybe Toronto, whoever winds up in that 3 seed. You just get a better matchup if you wind up in the 4 or 5. So there is a little bit of motivation there, but the home court thing going out the window for Philly, especially with Philly being one of the best home teams and one of the best worst road teams in the NBA, it kind of changes things in terms of what they're playing for. But to get back to your question, I mean, yeah, hopefully these games, kind of like the Celtics are doing with Kemba Walker. Brad Stevens says his knee is as healthy as it's been since he arrived in Boston in September, but he's still going to play just 18 to 20 minutes in the first game and ramp his way up in the seeding games towards the postseason. Hopefully Embiid's a similar situation where it's just kind of ramping him up and getting the restrictions off within either the last couple of seeding games or the postseason games.
Julian Edlow joining us here on the Boardwalk on a hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Julian Edlow for all of your DFS, Sportsbook, DraftKings, NBA analysis. Julian, you mentioned about how, it's not the same as Kemba Walker. One of the things that stands out to me with Embiid and the Sixers, though, is the fact that the Sixers, they have a lot of different situations they could end up in depending on how the seeding lays out. Is there a certain team that you look at in the Eastern Conference that the Sixers would either be, hey, that team would be a bad matchup for the Sixers, that team would be a good matchup for the Sixers?
I mean, at this point, Sabonis has a pretty serious injury for Indy, and he's gone on the bubble, and that's a team that I think that people were high on if Oladipo was himself. He's not necessarily there yet, so Indy's now lacking size, and Philly's strength is obviously size. Even though they're switching to the new lineup with Horford on the bench and Shake Milton starting, they still throw a lot of size at you. And that's one of the things that kind of hurt in matchups with Boston, too. So I don't think Boston's the worst matchup. There's just which team has more talent, Boston or Indy. So I think that kind of just answers the question for you, and you want to try and find a way to match up with the Pacers in the first round. The one thing that changes, though, like I said before, is ideally Philly would want to climb to a 4 seed and beat out Indy and have Indy be playing in the 5 seed and getting those games in Philly. Now, if Embiid needs to rest a game when that matchup is locked in and Philly just plays that at the 5 seed, who cares with the neutral court games?
How much of a difference do you anticipate Ben Simmons being at the 4 is for this team?
So I caught some of the scrimmages. I honestly need to watch more. I want to see the Sixers play a real game, and it's just like I want to see, is he really playing power forward, or is he positionally now called the power forward because Shake Milton's the point guard? Like, is Simmons going to still bring the ball up the court all the time? If Ben Simmons gets a rebound, you're telling me he's going to defer to Shake Milton at point guard and not just bring the ball down on his own? I just can't see it going that way. And Shake Milton's a great shooter, so I see this more as not a small ball lineup, but just not being as big as Philly was before, just because no other teams have that kind of size on the floor at the same time. So now you have the ball in Simmons' hands with Milton and Richardson kind of on the perimeter, ready to shoot, and you surround them with shooters, just like teams love to do with LeBron. So I want to see how this lineup looks in a real game for Philly, but I have a hard time believing that Ben Simmons is now going to just become your classic power forward. I don't think he's going to be a Karl Malone in these upcoming playoffs. So I'm curious to see how it looks, but I think the idea is just to get another shooter around Simmons and kind of match up better size-wise with other teams.
Let's go big picture on the Eastern Conference. A couple more before we let you go. Julian Edlow joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Julian, who is the biggest threat to the Bucks in the Eastern Conference?
So we've been talking all year. Which team is it? Boston, Toronto, Philly that poses the biggest threat to the Bucks. For the time being, from a talent perspective, I'm going to say it's the Celtics. They are healthy, assuming that Kemba gets off that minutes restriction for the postseason. They've played the Bucks very well this season. They went down huge, like 15 points or so in the first quarter both times they met, but wound up beating them by 11 in Boston. Lost a close 5-point game in Milwaukee. Just like we're about to see the Sixers and Pacers square off tomorrow in their first game, we're going to see the Bucks and the Celtics square off tonight in their first game. So we'll get some quick answers in terms of how those teams match up with each other. But I can't say that it's a strong take that Boston is the team. I think that Toronto is very good, and I think Philly is right there with Toronto just in terms of talent and really just not having to go on the road. I think also is going to help the 76ers a lot in this environment.
In your eyes, who is the league's MVP this season?
The MVP is still Giannis. I know LeBron's the only other guy that people can really bring up. But I know he was hurt. But LeBron and the Lakers still missed the playoffs last year. What's the major difference there? Getting Anthony Davis is what made a huge impact from getting this team from a non-playoff team, yes, without LeBron there for the whole season, into what's going to be the number 1 seed in the West. So really, Giannis putting up kind of historic win total numbers in Milwaukee, potentially. We'll never know how this season would have wound up. And the awards are being based on those games. Seeding games don't count towards the awards. So it's already determined. Giannis is the guy for me. I don't think it's all that close.
I disagree. I think it's LeBron.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's LeBron because of the fact that you go through the numbers. When LeBron's not on the court, that offense is an abomination. And when Giannis isn't on the court, the Bucks still have a good offense. And I think if we value that V in MVP, to me at least, I say if you take LeBron off the Lakers, they're not going to the playoffs. Take Giannis off the Bucks, they're probably still a 6 or a 7 seed.
I mean, arguably in the East, yeah, but there's a reason that we have 9 Eastern Conference teams in the bubble and 13 Western Conference teams. The West is much, much stronger. So I don't disagree with you. I think Milwaukee would be a 6, 7, 8 seed in the East without Giannis. And the Lakers without LeBron would probably be battling for a similar seed in the West. So I don't disagree with your logic. I just think that I think that Anthony Davis's impact, maybe LeBron would be having an MVP type season in terms of the numbers, or if AD wasn't there. But I think just eyeballing it, the Anthony Davis impact is too much to say that LeBron is the singular most valuable player to me.
We'll have to agree or disagree then. But I appreciate the debate because it's a conversation we asked everybody this week. Literally everyone who's come on this week, Julian, we've asked them, who's your MVP? And we've gotten a plethora of different answers between LeBron and Giannis. So we appreciate you playing along.
And I'll say this: I'm a big LeBron guy too, and especially coming out of Boston, people don't really like LeBron here. I like LeBron, and I appreciate what he does. If you ask me who do I want on my team for a playoff run, I'm taking LeBron. But just in terms of using the games that we have in front of us, the award in my mind goes to Giannis. But I'm certainly not trying to bash LeBron here in any way.
No, I don't think you're bashing him at all, but I appreciate the debate. Julian Edlow joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Julian Edlow. DraftKings, NBA Analyst. Check out all of his coverage of the sportsbook and DFS options you have all NBA season long. And as all guests, he appeared today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Appreciate the time, my friend.
Thanks. Anytime, Josh.